Welcome to the Family Office Sherpa podcast. I'm your host, Shaun Parkin, founder and managing director of Hall Road Investments. The aim of this podcast is to provide practical and implementable advice for those looking to build, manage, or service a family office. This is not, however, investment advice, so please check the disclaimer in the show notes. In this episode, I'm going to go through my top 5 takeaways from family office meetings in 2025.
This is the Family Office Sherpa.
Right. I'm doing this episode at the end of the year, obviously, but I speak to a lot of family offices, not just formal engagements, but really just having what you call chats, I guess. This podcast has been very helpful for that, the newsletter. But just generally, I get a lot of inbound requests for calls and, just generally having a discussion, which I love. I'm naturally curious, but also it's a really good way for my clients and myself to get insights into, what's working out there, what's not, what firms we should be talking to from a scaffolding perspective, and the ones, to be honest, we probably shouldn't be talking to. So I thought it might be interesting to go through, the 5 main things. So those things that just keep popping up. And, as much as we like to think we're all unique, there is some things that pop up for just about everybody. So I thought it was worthwhile to go through it today and really hopefully for those listening to sort of go, well, these are the thematics. And if of interest, reach out and we can go through it. Always happy to chat with family offices. Right. The first one. Technology is still an issue and potentially, more than ever. So I've been doing this for 7-ish years now, and as most people are aware, the business, so Hall Road really started as a consultancy for operations and tech, really focusing on the investment reporting structure. Now, I do less of those sort of one-off projects these days, but obviously part of the investment governance piece is to have good operations and tech and, importantly, really good reporting infrastructure. So it's still very much at the top of my mind and my client's mind. But it's still a challenge. It has changed, despite hype around new platforms and, everyone's talked about AI and all the rest of it and integrated reporting. The reality is, in 2025, that technology remains a pain point. There's no silver bullet. There's no off the shelf, this will work for everybody, despite the fact that we're all kind of challenged by the same things. Namely, they're fragmented systems, right? Multiple custodians, alternative investment platforms, different specializations within different ones, private market portals, passing and gathering that data set. And, just those idiosyncratic data sets that still come through for Australian investors and family offices, that ability to use global platforms is there, but are there local custodial feeds there? No. From a banking and cash feeds, no, there's not. There's always something that sort of stops it from being exactly what we're looking for. And then you've got pricing. There's some that are that midpoint, and we're starting to see a few more of those. You still get the outliers on the higher end side, and you get what you pay for to a certain degree. But I'm still, there is some confusion around pricing. Pricing on asset size is always a little bit interesting to me when you talk about software as a service. But yeah, there's still a lot of moving parts. There's still honestly, nearly every single family office conversation I have is what's happening with their reporting structure. Is there something that's going to be perfect for us? And it is getting closer. And a lot of the work that I do, along with sort of partner firms, is to try and find that best fit, right? And so, it's not an unusual conversation to have. And really interestingly, and continues to be, is even when the technology is good and it's appropriate and we've found the right option, adoption is still problematic. So that implementation, that execution piece, that onboarding piece. And really a lot of the time it's because the offices lack bandwidth a lot of the time. So, you can't add it to someone else's daily responsibilities. Or they just don't know what good looks like, which is not unusual because you don't really do this a lot if you sit within a family office, right? You hopefully just do it once and then, you build on it. So I think the biggest thing at the moment is And I do this a lot, which is find specialists that can do that onboarding piece. Because if you talk to the platforms, a lot of churn happens at that piece. And I've spoken to it in the past, which is there's this need to really be like, take it seriously, to put the time in, put it as a project. In the interview with Ben Edmonds from Alberts, they made that really clear point, which is to move these projects forward, you've got to allocate time, you've got to allocate resources, and you've got to treat it like a project, like any project, not just something that if we get to, we get to. So I'd say that that's, technology is still a very big topic of conversation. Number two, there's a lot of survey data, but not always a lot of signal. So noise versus signal here, right? As we've probably all seen, most of the big banks, private banks, things like that, even, most of the service providers have a survey of some description. Some of them are really deep in the weeds around all sorts of different things. Some specialize in different aspects of it. But, most consultancies, banks, custodials, investment firms, Big Four, they've all got these surveys, which are really, they started, when I first started the business, we only kind of had the UBS one, which used to come out every May. And now everyone's got one, which I think is great because there is a lot of interest there. But I'd say the volume of data has just exploded. And the usefulness of it is somewhat mixed, I would say. Because, and I found this as well, because when you talk to people that do fill out these surveys, and some surveys I fill out, to a certain degree, it's more the aspirations. You know what I mean? So if someone interviews you or sends you a survey question, and they say things like, yes, we're diversifying into private credit, or yes, we're building out our governance structure, or yes, we are planning on building a sustainability policy. They might say that they are, but there's nothing in place to say that they're actually going to do it, right? It's aspirational. There's nothing concrete happening yet. So I'm not sure if it is actually a signal. It might be signaling that people are going to do it, but is it actually going to be implemented? I don't see it as much. But again, this is my job a lot of the time, is to sort of say, well, if you're building an investment policy and a governance plan, I will move it along. We will get it done. That's sort of my value prop and Whole Road's value prop, which is to say, oh, you've got an idea around you want to do investment governance, then it's going to happen if you engage Whole Road. Another thing about this data set too is that there is an element of survivorship bias. Responses tend to skew towards, those that are sophisticated and best resourced, especially, those that from firms that target that very sophisticated, large offering. And you do get that, well, if they're doing it, everyone's doing it. And it's not necessarily the case. So there is that sort of bias towards large or more sophisticated offices. I would say the four things that we would look for, and this is talking to in these meetings. What are the four things that we're looking for from these surveys, right? It's things like, as practical as, how many people do we need in our office? Right? Like what is best practice? Give us a data, give some numbers here. Not how many people do others have, but how many do we need? What should our investment governance look like? Give us really specific, these are the guidelines. And you do see that from some of the good investment platforms and firms that say, this is how we do it. And you can use that as a template. Some of the UBS quarterlies that come through, there's a good one from Partners Capital. There's a few out there. And if you ask for it, I'm very happy to send them on to, or, put you in contact with them. But, just get good examples of what others are doing. Not, yes, we're doing it. I'd love to see in one of these reports, these are the 5 things that people are putting in their investment governance, and this is how we're doing it. Other things that I'm interested in particularly is things like the cost detail that comes through is really important or really interesting. How much are they spending on things like reporting? Like, what's your average spend on the platform? Is it $45,000 a year? Is it 100? Is it 10? Just to give me a ballpark figure and give me the asset size as probably the best indicator. All right, we're spending this much on it. Not these very broad operations and tech spend kind of things. And again, where are we getting stuck? If you listen to the interviews, the big part of it is like, what's a silver bullet? If you had one thing that you could unstick from around your process and and infrastructure, what would it be? And so just getting that, even if you gave me the 5 or 6 that everyone's got, it's I'm not sure how helpful it would be, but at least it'd give us comfort that, we're not the only ones. And if there's suppliers out there that says, well, do you know what we do is probably good for the family office space, and maybe we should look into it a little bit more. Right. And this is for all those survey, people that do the surveys. Don't stop. I really like them. I find them really, really interesting. So please keep them going. But, I think there's this significant amount of data. One person did sort of say, well, why don't we chuck all that data into AI and then have it spit out some thematics? And I'm like, well, yeah, but gosh, what are we going to do with that? It's just, it becomes so, I don't know. I don't know how helpful it would be. Anyway, number 3, advice has never been more important. I see and hear and talk to family officers all the time, which is around, what does advice look like? What's the most appropriate for us? What's going to be, what's going to really, really assist our family office, and how are they incentivized, but also really how does that commercial structure work for us, and how much can we lean on it, right? So in a word, so more families are recognizing that, I guess, access to good research, access to good managers, good manager of managers even, all this sort of stuff that's really, really hard to do in-house, and really, really hard for people that have never experienced advice or never financial services, or have but very, small amounts, because they might have been, head down, bum up for the last 30 years building a business. And then suddenly they have a liquidity event, and then every single advice business out there finds out, and then they go, well, these all look great. They all sound like they know what they're doing, and they've got fantastic this and that, and they've got tickets to the footy or whatever. So you go, well, what's going to be good advice for us, though, is the challenge. We're not looking for product pitches here. I guess what we're looking for is those that align with our office, but also can teach us, can be a good partner, can be a good advocate. And again, this is the sort of work that I love doing, and Hall Road is, again, brought in to do, which is RFPs, RFIs, things like that for wealth managers, asset managers, professional services, outsourced chief investment office, all sorts of different things, because it's such a hard thing to get right. And if you do get it wrong, it can be incredibly frustrating and an expensive exercise, and can potentially damage the office in the long term. So I would say, if you do have a liquidity event, don't do any calls, don't do anything, just don't do any investments. Just really sit down and think about, like, what's the structure, what's the purpose, and how we're going to implement that, and implement it with good counterparties, especially on the advice side. So in all these conversations, what I tend to do is, like, who's doing well? Who's really, for this type of client, who's doing a really good job? And that's the best thing I love about these conversations, is because you're starting to see thematics. You're starting to see the same firms pop up in the good column. And that's really what we're looking for. So again, that's where I add some value, hopefully. Number 4, there's this increasing idea that we should be taking responsibility for the next generation, and doing that through purpose statements. It's a bit long-winded, but what I'm sort of saying here is, we all know that, the people that are managing the assets, or the current stewards of the assets, aren't going to be here forever. But there's a real concern, and a concern of mine too, a lot of the time, which is, has that been articulated? Has the purpose been articulated? Is there an expectation around the next generation coming through being brought onto the journey and being a part of it? And to be honest, the best way to do that is to write something down. Get good, again, when I talk about this advice piece, get good advisors to help you with that from the purpose piece. I was recently asked to put 4 or 5 names up for assistance with this. And it's interesting because, they're different, but they all bring something to this. And I would be happy recommending any of them, because what's going to happen is they're going to be able to help the family articulate this process. And it is a process. There needs to be governance around it. It's family governance. And it's so important. And because when it's not done well, it becomes very fragmented as soon as, well, actually, even before the current stewards are no longer there. So difficult to articulate. That's why you need to get people in if you don't have the internal skill sets. And it's continuous topic of conversation with families. The fifth one, and this is really where officers are finally talking about operational structure and governance. So, and I don't know if it's me just picking that because these are the conversations that I have, but I'd say the work that I've got and this year and the conversations I've had over, some of them have taken years to get to this point. And I'm not sure what the catalyst was, but there's definitely a feeling this year in particular, and I'm not sure it's because there's added a bit of uncertainty or something, but people are saying, well, I don't think the structure that we have is robust. And I don't think the governance we have in place on the investment, and I'm talking about investment governance here, I don't think it's up to the standard that we need. Things like the investment policy, things like having some idea around decision-making, asset class definitions, total return expectations, all these kind of things that I've been talking about for years. I don't know what it is, but this year it seems to be everyone's going, yep, no, we're going to go, we have the purpose document, can you help us with the investment policy, the implementation of that investment policy, and then some element of, right, well, what else is there? What other structures, what other policies should be in place? We're talking about board structures, how the investment committee is set up, risk frameworks, what should our reporting cadence be, our meeting cadence, stuff that honestly was not really top of people's lists 3-4 years ago. Obviously, we had, pandemic and things like that, but even a year ago or 2 years ago, it was not necessarily that it was a struggle to have these conversations. It was more, yeah, we will get to that. And now it seems that people are getting to it, which is great. And I think maybe it's just a recognition that good governance protects relationships within the office. It creates clarity around roles. They're starting to sort of look at outside people coming in terms of staffing. So they think, well, we need some structure in place. It manages expectations, all sorts of good things, right? So what are they asking in these sorts of things? Things like, should we have a formal investment committee? My experience, yes, you should, right? Whatever that looks like, but some version of an investment committee. Should we have things like a CEO or an external chair or something? How do we manage succession? What is the oversight role of the family or the family board and things like that? It's just been really, really fun and really interesting to sort of go, well, what do we have in place? Where are the gaps that I see? What other families have done? And this is really what these conversations are about. What have people done well, and how can we learn from them? So ultimately, officers are realizing that without the governance, even things like small misunderstandings can scale into real problems, or one bad investment, or one element of the office that's not looked after, or there's no process around. That's when people go, oh, actually, we need something. And a lot of the time, it's people looking at what, not just them, but what their children and their children's children will be looking at back then. And they go, well, you had the chance to put some framework in place that would have saved this significant amount of heartache that we're going through now, or this conflict, or whatever it ends up being. So this element of prior planning is such a powerful tool, right? And it's a conversation I often have with them, which is if you were thinking of, you have a portal or something, and you look through the next gen, and you saw 7 generations down the track, and they saw what sort of questions would you be expecting, or what sort of things would they say? Well, we wish you'd done this, or it's turned out really well because of this, this, and this. Just having that conversation with your future shareholders is sometimes a cool thing to do. That's it. Okay, closing thoughts on this one. So, conversations in this year, I think this is showing maturity of the sector. I don't know if sophistication is the right word. I think it's always been, sophistication is kind of potentially a bit loaded, but I think people are looking at it like a business or an asset management business, as opposed to just the portfolio or whatever. So I think that's what we're seeing. We're starting to see, and this is why all this data, I was being a tad facetious there with the amount of data that we're getting, but you can glean quite a lot around sort of what's happening in terms of trends. And I think that maturation or that increased sophistication is a trend. And part of that trend is around the things that I've talked about, right? Which is getting good advice, getting appropriate advice, getting good governance structure in place, talking to other officers, being more collegial and intentional, and more honest about what their challenges are. And, these sort of conversations are excellent for seeing what works, what doesn't, and, to a certain degree, how can we circumvent some of those long-term challenges, those things that might turn into long-term challenges, and being able to use best practice and other people's experiences. So hopefully that was helpful. I find these conversations super interesting, super helpful. So if you're interested in talking about these things to me and you're in a family office, no matter where you are in the world, please feel free to reach out. If you're interested in understanding how I work with clients on these sorts of things, again, reach out. Shaun, so SHAUN at hallroad.com.au, or message me on LinkedIn, which has been great. A lot of people are pinging me on LinkedIn, so that's super cool. If you're enjoying the podcast, please ding the alert bell. It's always good to get that alert so you won't miss them. Please visit the Sherpa website, which is at thefamilyofficesherpa.com, where you can see the podcast, newsletter guides, and videos. Until next time, and next year, I guess, thanks for listening.